Hey Dexter, I just sent you the bio and
Hey everyone, hope everyone can hear me loud and um, my name is Dexter. I'm be here today. In another conversation with the Gantt Center. Today we're joined by fantastic artist Stephanie J. Woods. I'm going to just take a moment to familiarize you with Stephanie's work by reading her bio. Stephanie J. Woods is a multimedia artist from Charlotte, North Carolina, currently based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she is an assistant professor of interdisciplinary art at UNM. Her work fuses a relationship between photography and fiber. Additionally, her passion for interdisciplinary practices and material language is evident through her collaborations and implementation of symbolic materials that examine performative behavior, spaces, and alternative realities that reference Black American culture and her experiences growing up in the American South. Woods earned an MFA in New Media Sculpture and is the recipient of several residencies and fellowships, including BlackRock Senegal, the Fine Arts Work Center Fellowship, Acre Residency, the McCall Center for Art and Innovation, Oxbow of Art and Artist Residency, and Penland School of Craft. Her work is featured in the permanent collection at the Virginia Museum of Fine Art, located in Richmond. She's also exhibited her work at Smack Melon, located in Brooklyn, and Tiger Strikes Asteroid, also in Brooklyn. Additionally, her work has been featured in Bomb Magazine, Art Papers, Burn Away, and the Boston Art Review. Sorry. Stephanie is one of 25 artists included in Visual Vanguard, an exhibition of contemporary Black Carolina artists that is currently on view at the Harvey B. Gantt Center through January 17, 2022. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Stephanie J. Woods.
Hello.
Stephanie, can
Hello.
you hear me loud?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. We're using new technology, so let's get right to it. The way I like to do these things is, unless you can't hear me, we just keep going. Uh,
Nice.
we are not going to let perfection stand in the way of progress. So I am really excited to talk to you. This is our first, public conversation, so I'm getting to know you, as everyone who's joining us here is also getting to know you. I just read your wonderful and extensive bio, but I'd love to just take a beat here and give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. You meet me at a cocktail party, and I say, Stephanie J. Woods, tell me about the work that you make.
Yeah,
What would you say?
so Yeah, so of course, like I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. I was born in Seneca, South Carolina, but I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the work that I make is influenced by what I experienced growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, as well as Seneca, South Carolina. So the work that I make is mainly centered around textiles and photography, and also figuring out ways to integrate memories and experiences growing up in the South into my work in these almost like nuanced, like poetic ways.
Material you use in like an arc or knowing materials that you wanted to work with.
I'm sorry, can you
Can
repeat
you
that?
hear me?
I couldn't hear you.
Oh,
Yes, I can hear you
no
now.
problem. I said, talk to me a bit about the material. Sure, sure. Talk to me a bit about the materials that you use. Did you always know these were the materials you wanted to work with, or was this a journey that you've been on?
Yeah, so the materials I use mainly textiles. So everything is rooted in fibers, whether that's like it takes the form of a video or it's a performance piece or a sculpture. It always goes back to textiles. And this is really how I got into the arts was through sewing. And so my mom, she would take me to a seamstress like every day after school to learn how to sew. And so instead of like being in my room drawing the way that other people kind of get into the arts, a few or some, I was just in my room like sewing book bags for school or like coming out with like different outfits. And so the materials that I use is really just dictated by like what made me fall in love with art, which is textiles and like fashion. And so from that, I studied sculpture, and then it began to really study specifically ceramics. And I always just got pulled back to textiles. So it was, and oftentimes within my textile works, I'll use my background in ceramics in the way that you build things three-dimensionally within ceramics into the way that I approach my textile work. And then also thinking about like what are ways specifically that I can get members of my family to be really interested in the work, or people that I spend majority of my time with. And so that's where I began to think about how can I ingrain into my work really specific materials that have cultural like signifiers in them.
And thanks for sharing that. So how, how has South influenced your work? I know that's like a heavy question because there's so many ways that the South can influence, a person in many ways. But could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for me, it's mainly conversations, conversations that I will have with like my mother or like family members, going to like family gatherings, and then just like observing things that happen. So oftentimes, like sweet tea is like a big thing in the South, and so that's like something that I begin to implement into some of my previous work, where I would dye the cloth with sweet tea to kind of really embed like this certain smell or color into the work. Also, I've been in collaboration with another artist, artist Johannes Barfield, who uses like red clay, which is very specific to like the southern region of America, which has been also implemented into some of my newer work and like the performative pieces. So oftentimes it's mainly in a sense of materiality and dialect. So even with the use of language in my work, that comes from like when people say gonna instead of going, or the ways that I like kind of manipulate text also within my work is also based off of just conversations and things that I experience like on the daily, like within just interactions that I have with people around me.
So you're currently in Albuquerque, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
You're currently in. You can hear me. You currently
Yes, I'm in Albuquerque.
here. I am different and different kinds of influences, correct?
Yes, definitely.
Could you
Um,
speak to that? I mean, what would you say is the most profound difference?
yeah, well, I moved here in August. Got here August, I don't even remember what date it was. It was like August 14th. I literally moved here 3 days after coming back from BlackRock Senegal. So I feel like my whole time here has just been me running, trying to just catch up and actually get settled in. So I would say like my immediate reaction to what the difference is, because I'm so relatively new here, is this just really just the landscape, with the landscape just being so vastly different, like just being able to see like for miles and miles away, as opposed to like where I'm from, like a lot of times the trees are like blocking. There's always like, sun is like always out. And so it's been really great to just be surrounded by all that beauty that I see like on a daily.
No, that's awesome. And so that kind of it's funny. It connects to something. So the light where I am now, you can see I'm not as well lit as you, right? I just I'm in a valley of buildings in San Francisco right now. So no matter what I do, it just seems to be dark where where I am. But I'm normally I live in Japan, and so there's huge time difference between where I normally am and the States, and you also when you were in Senegal, obviously that was a bit of a shift for you. How so I've had to adapt to being in different time zones. So how was it adapting to being in Senegal as an artist? Like, what was that experience like? I know the time is one thing, but then there's also some other differences. I'd love to hear about your experience there. And also, could you tell us For those who may not even know what that residency is, can you talk about that as well?
Yeah. So this summer, I went to a residency. It's called BlackRock Senegal. And BlackRock Senegal started by artist Kahinde. And so there's, I think, 15 artists that are invited to come. It's three of us at a time when we go. And we're invited to stay at the BlackRock compound and create work in a studio. There's also a lot of programming centered around it where you can go out into the city and learn to do like different things that you're interested in from like different artisans or taking cooking classes. It's a vast array of things that you can do at this residency, which is just was really amazing. And so very honored to be able to like have attended that residency. So what I did was I was there for a month and a half. And during my time there, when you were talking about time difference, I like hear dates. So it was almost as though like when I went to Senegal that my body was actually going to sleep at a normal time now. So I kind of like really adjusted to where me staying up later actually was good because I was actually being a normal like functioning person going to sleep later. And so like that was just like really interesting to me to think about. Oftentimes when I looked at the clock, I was also thinking about like what time is it back home as well. But there were during my time, it was when I remember when I first got there. The thing that really struck me the most was just like how many people were just like constantly out, just like on the streets as part of their everyday lives. And it was just like this energy and vibrancy that I felt that I really loved and enjoyed immensely while I was there. And yeah, so yeah, if I don't know if that answers like everything you asked.
No, that's good. I mean, and what were you working on while you were there? Were you able to complete any new bodies of work? What was your day to day in terms of your studio practice?
Yeah, so like while I was there, my goal was to just be outside. So I tried my hardest to kind of just like not stay stuck in the studio. For me, it was more of a research trip. So it was more of like, what are ways that I can learn the most that I can by actually being on the ground and being around people. And of course, there was like a language difference. So their language is French, and I don't speak any any French at all. So and also Wolof. So I was taking Wolof classes while I was there, so that helped a little bit, like to be able to like speak with people when I was out. But I was fortunate to go to a art village and learn batik dyeing with an artist, Osman Ba, while I was there. So I've spent majority of my time like outdoors learning with that artist, and then also just like traveling throughout the car, seeing different parts of the city. I also was taking cooking classes as well. And so that was what I was working on was just mainly just being back, just being in Africa, just like enjoying being there and trying to take in all the culture that I could. But also my studio faced the Atlantic Ocean. And so
Mm,
every day I would, when I was in my studio, you would hear the sound of the ocean very dramatically. And so I spent a lot of my time just looking at the ocean and just almost just kind of just experiencing that and being really obsessed with that like horizon line of the Atlantic Ocean. And so I also did like film photography. And so every day at the same time, I would take a photo of the Atlantic Ocean horizon line. And so I'm still looking for a place to kind of get that film developed, but it's like tons of film photos that I took as well. Like that was like a daily ritual that was almost like meditative for me. I feel like looking like over that horizon line, it was like I felt like I was kind of in conversation with like my family on the East Coast because of that proximity to the ocean as well. And so That's what I spent majority of my time doing. I also did like studies, material studies, just like textile design and different color compositions, and really just for me the main part was to just learn as much as the language as I could of wool off, learn how to cook the food, and then learn also just like what it is to just be around people that I'm not around like on a daily. So.
Right, right. I mean, and you mentioned family, so and if you don't mind, I'd love to talk a little bit about that. Um, was that your first time going to Africa?
Yes.
And was your has your family been very supportive of you as an artist? I mean, again, I don't want to pry, but I'm just kind of curious. Like, I imagine, a mom or a dad, they're saying, well, our daughter is an artist. She's also an artist, and taking her to the continent. Like, was that you mentioned Africa?
The end part of what you said I did not hear. So, but
Did you have conversations with your family about going to Africa? Like, what were those conversations like? And I just from the standpoint of like, I think that's like a wonderful big step, right? It's a. I mean, for a lot of Black Americans, there's a dream of traveling to Africa that's never realized by most people because for circumstantial reasons. But what was that conversation like with your family, if there was one?
yeah, so I think I heard the first part when you were like, as far as my family being supportive of the arts. Yeah, so like my when I was growing up, like I was in theater camp, like writing camp, orchestra, like all these different things, culinary arts, not really visual art, every other thing in the arts, growing up. And so there definitely was some form of like support in that capacity, but could be like, a level of not understanding. Like being an artist it has a level of, I feel a level of privilege to it. And so like
Mm.
not really understanding like what it means to say, okay, I'm dedicating my life to making art. But definitely, like over time, showing, I guess, like members of your family or people around you that are not well, as versed in it, like this is a viable lifestyle. This is a lifestyle that is also an option to maybe what we feel as though is like the route that we're supposed to take. And so with my dedication to it, I feel like I have garnished a level of love and respect for like what I do. And so like definitely telling your parents that I'm going to an artist residency that is with Kehinde Wiley, the person that painted Barack Obama. Like saying that, they're like, "Oh, you did that? Yeah, you're an artist now." So I think like it was a level of like I understand now. As soon as I said, "Okay, the artist that painted Barack Obama." Now it was really a clear understanding of like what it is that I do and what my goals are as an artist, and then also just the fact that I was going to Africa. I'm the first person in my family to go to the continent of Africa, and so like that within itself, to kind of really say like the places that art can take you. It can take you to like to be able to see the world, which I feel like it has helped me travel and see like so many different things over the years. And so that was definitely a conversation, but it was also there was this romanticized like conversation that was also had of like you're going back home, like in a sense, to see like where your ancestors came from. So
No, that's great, and I'm hoping you can hear me. I know there was a little bit of a lag there. Just want to make sure before I ask the next question. So, thumbs
yes.
up if you could hear me. Oh, great, great. So, let's talk about some of your artistic influences. I mean, I'd imagine there are many. Just from hearing you speak and reading about you, I'm sure there's so many, but who are, one or two of the people, and they can be artists or not, but they've been the most influential on you as an artist?
I would say at the moment it is my husband, um, because like we collaborate a lot. So like there's a huge level of influence, and he's also an artist, like back and forth conversation that happens. When I was younger, it was my mother and Whoopi Goldberg. I just love like all Whoopi movies, and then like also like I guess like someone that's pretty popular. I guess like Lorna Simpson. I just really love the work of Lorna Simpson and the way that the repetition is used with her work within the photography. And so yeah, those are three that I would say. I definitely have to give more thought to that, like a little bit more now. It's interesting to think about how like you're influenced over time at different facets of your life versus like when you're adolescence to like when you get a little bit older. Like so, I feel like the influence is always like constantly shifting and changing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is absolutely right. And that's one of those questions too. It really depends on the year you ask me, and then my answer would probably be very, very different. So it's all fair that, it would be the same. But I will also give you props because like I don't think anyone has ever said Whoopi Goldberg as an answer to that question. So that's the first. That's the first. And I love Whoopi Goldberg, but that's like a first. Like I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, um, we have some images of your work that we want to share. We can do a slide presentation and we can talk about that. See, look at that. That's like magic. Wow, look at that. There they are. So I know there are a handful of images along with some details of those images. So why don't we just take a moment to talk about each of these, and when you're done, I'll just ask that we advance to the next.
Okay.
So let's start.
So you just want to start with, yeah, I'll just jump right in. So this image here, this is actually of an install image of a show that I did that was at Tiger Strike's Asteroid in Brooklyn, New York. The title of it was False Illusion. And two of the pieces actually in this photograph are in the Harvey Gantt Center right now. And so the far back one that you see straight ahead, and then the one to the left, that's like kind of like a greenish mint color as well. And so this was basically the first time that I saw all of the quilt pieces that I've been working on in one space. Typically, I work mainly in performative photography. That includes some form of like masking and kind of using clothing, textiles as props in regards to using my own body within the work. And so this was a shift in my practice where to kind of photography to like, taking the images myself and using them within the work. And the photographs were actually captured by my mother or either a friend of mine that was captured during like the 1990s, early 2000s. And in these images, you can see that I think when we get a little bit closer to the image, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that the photos are transferred onto the surface of these almost blanket-like forms. And really as a way to think about like this idea of taking these images and conversation with like photo quilts and things like that. So this particular photo here, in the previous picture, it had the word excellence that was in reverse behind the image. And so thinking really about, and the excellence is in Black. So of course, like Black excellence, thinking about that, but this idea of like flipping it in reverse and thinking about like these expectations that we put on ourselves, these harsh expectations to like over excel, to like push ourselves to a level of like working ourselves to a pulp, almost in a sense, but also thinking about like that even with the excellence, it's great to have these enduring terms, but also how can they be to our detriment? And so like with that particular piece, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that it's a step team. So the piece is called Sisters Educated and Liberated. It's a step team that I was on in high school, actually in Charlotte at Myers Park High School. Myers Park High School is a white high school. And so with this step team, it was a group of black women coming together. We ultimately created a space for ourselves within that school. And so we created a space where we can come together every day after school. We could practice. We can embrace our culture. And it was really a place of joy and a place where we can really just be free in a toxic environment where our teachers were toxic, and also like the peers that we were around were toxic. And so this was a photo that I had, and what I wanted to do is I looked at the photo, and I began to think about like what are ways that I want to begin to manipulate this image. At that time when I was working on this piece, I was thinking about adultification, which adultification was a study by Georgetown Law about like how young girls at the age were seen as more in their counterparts. This goes just for like, young girls, but also like Black boys. And so things that I was thinking about when I looked at this image was the idea of like us wearing camouflage, the idea of us being like hyper visible when we were at school, but also rendered invisible. And so things that I began to do was the first thing I did was circle the smiles, like in the photo. To really think about like what are ways that I can pull out specific moments out of this image. And that was really thinking about like, trying to channel like what I was feeling when I was in high school. So I looked through an old high school yearbook and began to see like what are things that I did in that yearbook. And I remember that I would like go in the yearbook and circle like my homegirl, and then put like, you're all that, and like put these kind of like commentary next to their heads and draw like arrows and then like write things. And so kind of wanted to kind of put that same approach to this photo. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see that the smiles are circled with like this gold foil, and then there's these arrows that are like pointing to like different texts. Some of the text is really enduring. Some says like all that in a bag of chips. Some says like bleed in the shadows. So it goes back and forth between like being uplifted and also like contradictory, to really think about really performative behavior versus what they're presenting outwards. So they're laminated, and like you'll see that they're reflective. It's laminated in a polished furniture vinyl, like couches that you would see in homes, like the couches that are like covered in furniture vinyl. Really, as this way of thinking about preservation, but also thinking about like the photo albums where these photos lived. They were inside these photo albums that have the plastic covering on it that's supposed to protect the images. And what I found, like from my research over time, is that that plastic can actually deteriorate the image. So it's actually doing the opposite of what it's meant to do, which kind of led to like the next piece that I made, which is the next image, which were these photos that I found in my childhood home in Charlotte, North Carolina. My mother has like all these photo albums with images in them. And so thinking about like this idea of like loss, what would it mean to lose this like these photos, lose this legacy of our existence of like being. And so I began to also think about ways that I can preserve the images in another form outside of the photo album that's hidden away right now, risking the like risk of no longer being seen by people because of the way that they're preserved. And so I started scanning these images and then turning them into these photo quilts that are and the images are transferred onto the surface of the quilts. This particular quilt was made in collaboration with my mother. So during the summers, I will go to my mother's house. My mom has a huge garden. I don't even call it a garden. It's like a food forest. At this point, it's a farm. And so like what I do is I go to her house and I help her harvest the food. So I'll pick like figs and like things for her. And that particular summer, she wanted to do something that I like to do as well, even though I do like gardening, but I don't have a green thumb like her. So we began to sew these quilt tops together. And so my mother would cut the pieces and I would sew them, or she would pick out the fabric and then I would sew it together. And I thought it was a really great way of taking these photographs that were captured by my mother and actually putting them onto a quilt piece that was made in collaboration with her. So not only it's a photograph of a memory, the actual object that we made is a memory as well of like summers with her in the garden, doing
Cool.
things like together. Yeah. And then you can go
That's
to
cool.
the next image. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just saying that's very special. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and then like in the process of like transferring these images onto the quilts, um, the photos will get deteriorated. So it's almost doing what I'm trying not to do in a sense. Like I'm trying to preserve them, but then there's still an element of loss that happens. And so that's when I would go in and like um, hand draw in like moments from the image to try to annotate it. Sometimes there's text on it, which is conversations that I will have with people in my family about the photo. So like with this particular photo, I asked my mother, um, there's an image on the previous slide of my grandmother. She's in the photo. My grandmother passed away when I was two. So my grandmother is actually the one circled with the white lines and like blue and purple around it. And I asked my mother, is this your year or two? And then I responded, I wish I knew. I wish I could remember. And so that text is like embedded into the piece as well. This idea of like memory, of like how long, what does it mean for our brain to filter through certain things? Of like I can remember things when I was an adolescent, but like why can't I remember my grandmother? You know, so thinking about the function of the brain, like in that capacity of what it chooses to retain and then release as well. And then we can go to the next image. So this is another piece that's in the show. And this particular piece, what I like about this photo, my mother's actually in the image in this one. So someone else took this photo. And what I like about this one is the candidness of it, as opposed to the other two images. You could tell that we are aware that we're being photographed. Like we're posing for the camera in a sense. Whereas with this one, it's caught in mid-moment. And so that is something that I also think about is like, what does it mean to like put on a show for the camera or like within your daily lives as well? And then also to be abruptly like stopped in your tracks and then capture like this candid moment. And so with this image, this one doesn't have text in it, whereas the other two pieces that I shared, they do have text. And this one was more about like intuitive gestures. I was listening to a Solange talk in Solange album, A Seat at the Table. She was saying like she had so much to say, as opposed to like the album that came after that. It was more of like I had so much to feel. And I feel like as you see like the progression of these pieces, you'll see that it goes from like implementing more text to like the text beginning to like not be used as much in the work, to where it's more about implying things as well. So like circling the eyes, pointing your attention to the hands in the photo, the way someone's holding their hands. It says a lot about their level of comfort, how they could be feeling, and what they're looking. So this piece is actually hung on a curtain rod, and it's my home, like the snap curtain rod, snap on, and then you can snap off. And so that's how the piece is hung up. And this was made in collaboration with my mother as well. Half of the quilt is like colors that she chose, half of it is colors that I chose. But when we were working on it, it's a lot more vibrant. So the piece is actually bleached after we sew the quilt top. So that way the images can transfer onto the surface of the quilts with a little bit more vibrancy. So they don't actually look like this when we're working on them. They're like these really bright colors. And so if you go to the next slide, you can see a detail of the piece. And so depending on like what the pattern was of the quilt, it'll change or manipulate the image. And this is also laminated and polished furniture vinyl as well, as a way of like protecting the photo. Thanks. I think that's the last. Or is there
No,
one more image?
that's great.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and that's just like another install shot. I don't really need to say much. That's just more
Right.
pieces from that series.
Great. So we're getting into the home stretch, Stephanie. First of all, thank you for that. That was a really, really great overview with a lot of detail about your work. What I find also interesting is how common the experience of having parents or grandparents plastic on your there's knowledge my bitch cover things and cover furniture with the sorry and I remember I hope you can I remember photo albums family photo albums with plastic on top of Leroy top of like the photos that you would get done at the old pharmacy or something and how after years being in those albums with all the humidity and everything else, you go to take the photo out and the photo almost peels off onto the plastic. It's like
Yeah.
you like completely destroy the photos trying to protect them.
Yeah.
So you're in your studio, and I think this is a great opportunity for us to talk a little bit about your space. We don't have to move around in the space per se, but I see that there's some work behind you, and I'd love for you to take a moment or two and share some information with us about the artwork that's on the wall behind you.
Yeah, so the work that's behind me is actually like in process. The fabric pieces over here are in process. And so those were things that I worked on when I was in Senegal. So what I was saying that I was working on like material studies and things like that. I started those in Senegal. The red and yellow one is a checkered piece that I did with an artisan in Senegal, Osman Ba, when I was learning batik dyeing. And we worked on this together collaboratively, that checkered piece together to make it. And so it was really interesting because when I went to learn the process, I brought the pattern that I wanted to do. So I brought just a plain checkered pattern to learn when I went. And I brought that pattern because like actually when I was out in Senegal, like in the markets, I saw this really beautiful checkered pattern fabric that I brought back to my studio. And I was thinking a lot about checkers because my grandfather used to play checkers all the time. And so like it was a phrase that kept going through my head when I was in Senegal. It's like my papa used to play checkers. And so I became obsessed with like the checkered pattern, which I'm still trying to like figure out like how that's being used in my practice, even though quilting is almost kind of similar to like checkering and stuff. And so I think this is an image of the fabric that I've found when I was there. This is actually a sketch from a video piece that I was working on in Senegal. And when I took like this checkered pattern to them, he was like, that's the first thing you do when you learn batik dyeing is how to do checkers. And he was like, if you know how to do checkers, then you could do any pattern that you want after you learn that masterfully. So like that's what we spent our time doing was making checkers. And I remember when I was doing it, he kept like talking crap about like the way I paint. Like I'm not a painter. Like I studied sculpture. I actually went all the way through school without taking a painting class. And so he's like, you need to know how to handle the brush better. You need to know how to handle the brush. You need to be like a little bit like fluid with it and stuff. So like that idea of fluidity and like just relaxing is something that I associate with the checker. And also like the checker pattern with my grandfather was like him playing checkers was relaxing. And so like that experience with like working with Osman was almost for me like a meditation on relaxation through this repetition of like making these checkered patterns. And then like the next ones are like these colorful pieces that are also checkers. And this was a study that I did that's based off of this outfit that I saw by this guy in Senegal. I'll show this picture. I wonder if you can see it. Maybe with my camera. Can you see the checker? Oh, no. Okay, there it goes. This blue and orange color.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came, I saw him walking down the street, and I was like, "Oh gosh, this outfit is so dope! I love it so much!" And like the vibrancy of it, just like the colors. And I realized, like in my practice, I don't feel like I use color as much as I would like. And so, just like seeing like how vibrant his clothing was, I became really obsessed with like these complementary colors, these very bright, vivid colors. And so I've started doing these studies with the checkers, like in that as well, and thinking about ways that it can go. Currently, like sketching, I guess, like these different um, almost sculptural arrangements as well that they can like grow into as well. And so this sketchbook is also like pretty much my studio in Senegal, like in a book. And so also like another piece that's on the wall is just like a photo piece of a banner that was installed outdoors. And so also just thinking a lot about like the how work can be ephemeral and like can exist within a time and place as well, and thinking a lot about like outdoor spaces and ways that I can begin to take my work more in a public space in and outside of our gallery context.
Well, that is wonderful, and we are so right on time. It's so amazing. We are like nailing it. Steph. We're nailing it. So, so we have questions that have come in from the audience. Go down by one. So the question is, how do you push yourself to work when you're not motivated? Can you hear
I
me?
don't. Yes, I can
The
hear you.
question is, how do you,
My response is,
okay, how do you push
yeah.
yourself to work when you're not motivated?
Um, I don't push myself to work when I believe in rest. I don't believe in this level of like hyper productivity. So like I'm not like in the mood, I will not make it, because I feel like me actually taking the time to rest will create opportunity for me to like open the door for enjoying to be in my studio. Um, so that's just the way that I approach it.
Great. I'm asking these questions out of sequence. So how did you get selected for BlackRock Senegal? What was that process like?
Hmm. I don't know. I wish I knew. I know Naomi Campbell was one of the jurors. So I just like submitted my application, and then I just got an email, and they said that you got it, and I was in shock, and was in shock until my feet touched Africa. So yeah, that's. I don't really know how they review the application. Yeah.
What was and so to that point, the application process, you don't have to go into incredible detail, but did you have to, obviously, I'd imagine you had to submit your CV and your bio, obviously, and some work samples. But
Yes.
was it more than that? Did you have to write something specifically about why you would be a good person to be in the residency?
Yeah, so I submitted my work samples with a description of it, and then I actually submitted like 3 sentences. So they asked for a cover letter, and I didn't think I was going to get it. So I actually was like, let me just write 3 sentences. So I wrote, I would like to learn from artisans within the community about textiles if they were to grant me the opportunity. That was literally what I wrote. So
Wow,
I think it was me just being very direct about what I wanted is I want to learn. And that was what I
mhm,
prioritized. And so, yeah, I
that's
think also
great.
being just
And
like
then,
cautious of time. So,
and so a couple more questions. So what collaborative art have you released with your husband? Are there particular pieces you guys have worked on together that you could speak to?
yeah, there's a show up actually right now at Candela Galleries in Richmond, Virginia, that was curated by Africana Film Festival. And so it has 3 of our video pieces in there. Usually, whenever I make a video piece, it is made in collaboration with him. So if you see any of my video works, all of those are in collaboration with him. Like he always does the sound that accompanies it. He creates the score, and also he will help me like with the cinematography and like drafting out different ideas. So usually it's always us collaborating on like video projects.
Great. And other than Osman, did you have an opportunity to visit the studios of other artists?
Yeah, so there were we went to art openings. We've also there's like a pretty much an arts community. So where Osman was working, there were just tons of studios of artists that were there working as well. And so when I was there working with Osman, there would typically be like 5 other artists outside with us. That like had studios in that area. So there was a woodworking place, there was like metal casting, ceramics, people painting. So it was just like a whole community of people just working. And there was also like a gallery on site, like where those studios were.
You mentioned, your family kind of coming to the realization that that art can take you places, like really like take you places. Um, and so, what do you see as your own dreams and goals for your future as an artist? Where do you want your art to take you? If you could articulate that.
Hmm. Yeah, that's something that I'm still defining. I'm kind of just letting myself just like be in the moment of it. Um, Typically, like the way that I approach things is I apply to everything. I apply to so many things out of like hopes of me getting it with no real expectations of like disappointment of whether or not I get it or not. And so like with that, I've allowed myself to kind of be fluid within that manner. And so definitely like I would like to continue to do things international. And so not just be restricted to the United States, but to also have my work visible on other continents. And then just be able to like continue doing what I love and continue to travel. And I feel like that's kind of what I've been doing for the past few years. And so I'm really grateful.
And so I know that there's often of conversations amongst artists and other people who work in the arts about, sort of like the commercial side of the art. And how have you engaged with the commercial side of the art world in terms of showing in commercial galleries, having people collect your work? What has that experience been like for you?
Um, for me, like in the beginning, I did not want to sell my work. um, I felt indifferent about it, specifically because of the subject matter that I talk about within my work. Um, it feels weird to sell the work to anyone that is not pretty much a BIPOC collector, someone that is not like for me to sell to white collectors just feels wrong. And so I did experience a lot of people that wanted to buy the work that I felt it could not exist within those spaces, and that wasn't the place for it to be. And so ways that I navigate that is I filter through when someone wants to buy my work, I have a questionnaire that they have to answer to know whether or not that I feel like the work can go with them. And so about kind of what are things that where do they see the work going? I don't typically like for the work to just like stay in someone's home. And so if someone were to buy the work, I've learned now to ask, are you letting it go on loan for shows? Are you actively thinking about what the life of this work would be if you were to pass away? Like what are you thinking about as far as the legacy of these pieces? And those are things that I think about. And that's also what I think about when working with galleries as well. Like who are they selling the work to? Who is their market? And whether or not to make the work on sale or not for sale. Typically, I usually work with institutions. I don't usually work with commercial galleries. So I'll work with universities as like a visiting artist, doing residencies, doing public art pieces. That is usually like where I found that my lane is working in between that nexus of like commercial and then like higher education.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned that really strikes me, you mentioned this idea of applying for a lot of things as like just part of your regular process. And it's so funny because what you described is something that I've said to so many people that they need to do. And that is don't put all of your heart and eggs into one opportunity for a grant or a residency. You need to be applying on a weekly, if not weekly, certainly monthly basis. You need to be applying to two or three things because you're not going to get
Mhm,
most things you apply to. And if you put all of
mhm.
your eggs in one basket, all you're going to be doing is breaking your own heart every month. Like why do that to yourself?
Yeah.
Apply to 40 things. Apply to 40 things in a year and maybe you'll get two, but that's all you can anyway, right? So anyway, I definitely think that's like a great way to work. And then as far as like commercial galleries, I've always been fascinated by artists that make the decision that they can have a flourishing career and they don't necessarily have to rely on the gallery system to do that. And I think that what can come out of that, if you think about it on a long enough timeline, is that your work actually reaches more people, and it actually gets your work gets documented in a different way,
Mhm,
um, by working with like university galleries, not commercial galleries, and working with nonprofits or museums. It's an entirely different way of building a career. And while it might not result in like immediate, like like big sales,
mhm.
I think it creates an importance and value to the work that is longer lasting, is not just basically around a trend.
Yeah.
So I know we're coming down to the final few minutes, and I did have one or two more questions. So, if you'll bear with me,
Yeah.
what do you think about the current state of like there seems to be like a tremendous amount of excitement around like Black art and Black artists, and it's been going on for a while now. But what's your read on all of that excitement about Black art?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely times reparations. Like we need to pay up, but it's also weird because I feel like I will notice that a place will contact me to fulfill an agenda. Um, and so,
Mm.
like a place that hasn't already been in alignment with that mission, but now they have a level of performative alliance, which can be pretty weary to navigate. Where it's like, okay, do I take this opportunity to show my work, or do I pass on it? Because it's definitely where we need to understand of like, okay, we need to reconcile with history and understand that these voices have been silenced, and we need to create a space, but also knowing, not wanting to be a part of a fleeting moment. So like everything that I participate in, I don't want that to be like the one off of that institution. So like in 3 years time they're not showing Black artists, like that's not something that I want to be a part of. And so those are decisions that I think about when someone contacts me. Are they a part of a trend, or do they have they really created like mission statements within their institution of like their timeline of goals of like how are they going to kind of rectify with like the exclusion that they've been doing over the years, and make this a long-term commitment and not just like a one-off show.
No, I totally get that. So we're down to the final question. So you described how you collaborate with your husband, you even and collaborating with your mom. That's like really fantastic, and I don't hear that from many artists actually, at all. But being an artist is rewarding, but it can also be really challenging, right? I mean, just for a lot of different reasons. And so for other artists that are watching and listening to us right now who might be sort of trying to figure their way forward, can you share like one obstacle that you've encountered as an artist and like how you overcame it? And it can be anything that you're willing to share, but I'm curious.
Yeah. So say there was moments in time where I did not make work for like a year, that was really an obstacle, because it was really, really coming to terms with like, am I still going to be an artist? And so like the kind of when someone asked the question about this idea of like, how do you push yourself to continue to make when you don't feel motivated? And so I allowed myself to take that break. And so I feel like it's important to take those breaks when you need to take that break, if you have like the ability to do that. And so like in that year, it felt low for me. But in retrospect, when I came out of that time of not making, I feel like all it was like a burst of like all this work that came out that has actually been showing that I'm really proud of. But then also thinking about residencies. And so like residencies was a means of living for me. That was my house. That was my house. Like I was going from one residency to the next residency, and like that was where I lived. And so like also this idea of like not having stable housing, of like constantly in flux, whereas now I do, which I'm very fortunate to have, and very appreciative. But like that is a challenge of like having to constantly be on the move and on the go. When I was at a point where I was trying to try out all these different residencies, even though it was really amazing, I've had to strip back the things that I choose to take with me, or choose to leave, which was a real challenge.
Well, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time today and sharing all of these insights. I mean, it's been a fantastic conversation. I think so.
Yeah.
So so we've come to the end. I just have some closing remarks that I'd like to just share with the audience. I want to thank everyone for joining tonight's conversation. We hope you've learned from the journey and motivation behind Stephanie J. Wood's work. I know I've learned a lot. The Gantt Center is honored to create programs that celebrate excellence in Black art and culture. And with your support, the Gantt can continue to expand their impact on the community they serve. To learn more about the ways you can support the Gantt Center, please visit their website, ganttcenter.org/donate. Follow the Gantt Center at HB Gantt Center. So that's at HB Gantt Center on all social media to be updated on programs and initiatives. And join me for the next open air conversation on November 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Until then, I want to wish you all a good night and take care.